Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the top 10 most important Ark Tames, so let's get straight into it. In number 10, I've decided to put the UT, as bosses are quite a big part of a general Ark player's playing, and obviously this creature is going to drastically help your performance in a given boss scenario. Although sometimes you can get away without using one, it is still good practice to have one. And it is so much better that they're in the game than if they weren't in the game. Although a bit of a late addition to Ark coming in 2017, they have been used non-stop ever since, and they really do deserve to be an important Ark creature. Obviously, these creatures are going to be widely used by so many people, and when they do what they do, where you get, I think it's 25% damage reduction and 25% increased damage with that courage roll, it is just such an advantage to you. You really can't, not use it in a sense, because you just might as well. They're so easy to tame and to obtain, and the benefits you can get from them is just great. And if you're ever wondering what you're actually going to ride in a boss fight, just ride on a UT, and that's probably going to be a job, especially if you're playing on single player. Next up, I've decided to put the Rex, as this has definitely been an important creature across Ark's life and history. Of course, you could not really have Ark without the Rex, and although maybe, yes, it's not the most commonly used boss creature anymore, or most liked one, at least maybe from my perspective, because I don't really use these things a whole lot from my playing, is what I meant to say. Although people still use these things all the time, they really do deserve to make the list as a fantastic boss creature. Spinos are also quite important as well, but in terms of the scale between Rexes and Spinos and how they're used for boss fights, Rexes always take the win in terms of the importance of them, so hence why I'm putting them here instead, because they really do need to be on this list. Although maybe not the most important to me, they definitely are a very important Ark creature, and the game would definitely not be the same without them. It is a really good thing that they're in the game, because their health is great, their damage is great. Although yes, maybe their weight and stamina isn't something to be proud of, it still is going to carry you through those boss fights, as you're not going to be riding on these things anyway. Their stamina is literally infinite when you're not riding on them, and you're going to have a perfectly fine time with these creatures, as their health and damage is what you're going to need for those boss fights, especially the longer ones. Some other creatures do fall behind because of the lower health, whereas the Rex can still keep pushing through. Good example for that is the boss at the end of Genesis Part 1. It's quite a lengthy fight, and Rexes are one of the only good options for it. Next up, we've got the Maywing, and this is really a cornerstone changing creature. It is an absolute game changer when this creature actually did release into the wild of Ark with Genesis Part 2. It is by far the best travel mount which you'll find out there. It just has so much speed, and its saddle is obtained at level 18, so there's really nothing which can be said negatively about this creature, apart from the fact it's a glider and not a flyer. But still, in low difference in elevation environments, you're going to not struggle whatsoever to still gain all of that speed. They're also pretty great swimmers as well, and their underwater flying, that doesn't make sense, underwater movement is actually pretty decent as well. You might not expect that from a creature like this, but it kind of does make sense when you consider them a sort of platypus type creature. They also do act as a portable feeding trough as well, with that slightly disturbing animation that we all know nowadays, and this is just useful if you're a breeder. It's going to feed all the creatures around it. They can also steal baby creatures from enemies too, and carry 4 in their saddle, and they can gather berries as well, which is just a nice ability to have on top of it all. In number 7, I've decided to put the Pteranodon, as this, although maybe not as good as a flyer or a glider, I should say, as the Maywing. I would take the Maywing over the Pteranodon any day. This is more important in Ark than the Maywing, as it's often going to be the first flyer that you ever obtain, and it's been here since day 1, and we've been using these things basically for 9 years now. which is actually a little bit insane when you think about it. Also, I'm not sure if they did have that spin ability when they first released, or I didn't use it. Either way, they have definitely progressed in a way, I'm pretty sure, over Ark's history and life. Obviously, you've got all the variants of Pteranodons as well, although I'm pretty sure all of them aren't tameable because you've just got the corrupted Pteranodons on extinction. That's besides the point. The Pteranodon has been and still is actually, don't know why I'm failing so much with this one, a really great and useful flyer for many players out there. The only real difficulty in obtaining one, at least for your first time, is the chitin and keratin required for the saddle. At least I've always struggled with that a little bit. Not really nowadays, because, you know, just killing a few insects and you can get it all done. But if you don't know exactly what to do and then you start fighting carb enemies for ages, especially if you're on official rates, it can take some serious elbow grease to actually get through a tame like that. But yes, it's been very influential and it's deserving of the list. I've decided to put the Stego on the list as I find this is one of the best berry gatherers out there, and the game would simply not be the same if this creature wasn't here. Yes, the Trike and the Parasaur have played their part too, but in my opinion, the Stego has played the biggest of them all. While being still a relatively easy creature to get, just being slightly harder than something like the Parasaur or the Trike. Obviously the Trike's harder than the Parasaur, it's kind of a progression system. You would get loads and loads of berries out of a creature like this, and although they were slow and their stamina wasn't the best, you could still level it up and get it to be reasonably good pretty quickly. And on top of all of this too, they are just so good at berry gathering, especially considering their size. A Bronto may be better at gathering all of your berries in terms of volume of berries, but in terms of just general like taming to berry gathering ratio, or ease of taming to the amount of berries that you can actually obtain from a creature like this, it is insane. And obviously with the TLC as well, these are great turret soakers, so that is a really useful thing for PvP players as well. They just have so much versatility and they're so useful as berry gatherers, useful as obviously turret soakers. We all know the Stego, and at some point we're probably all going to tame the Stego, unless, you know, you barely play any Ark. At number 5, I am putting the Theory, as I find this is just such a good gatherer of so many resources, and also a good boss creature on top of it. It has been really important to Ark. Again, you could say the Mostrops is a great gatherer of organic polymer and fiber, and yes, definitely for the organic poly, I do prefer the fiber gathering of the Theory, and arguably fiber is a much more important resource. Actually, not even arguably, it just simply is a much more important resource, and to have a creature that can gather it very well means that you don't have to go around using your hands on all of those bushes just to get yourself some fiber, because Ark definitely requires a lot of fiber, or having to craft a sickle and just go through loads of bushes. Still, with the sickle you can get quite a handful of fiber, but it's just much more fun to do with a creature like the Tickle Chicken. That's partly where its name comes from, because it kind of looks like it's tickling the grass, and it's got the, you know, it's got the long tickle fingers. They wouldn't tickle if they were actually in real life, they would probably just slice you to bits. They can also gather loads of wood and thatch on top of that, and meat, hide, chitin, keratin, all those drops that you get from creatures, because at the end of the day they can harvest bodies, which most herbivores actually can't do, and it's a really nice ability for this creature to have. Although taming can be a little bit difficult and time consuming, the saddle was unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
And what can really get better than that? Continuing on, I've decided to put the Desert Modus here, and although a recent addition, it has really changed the sort of progression of taming in the game, as that Sanguine Elixir, 30% of the tame just done like that with a click of a button, it really does add something, okay? That it just changes up the game dynamic for some difficult or longer tames. On top of this, it can also gather blood bags, which has been something which has been an absolute pain to do until the Desert Modus released. It is also just a very fast glider, and it can pick players off mounts with absolute ease in given PvP scenarios, so you really won't struggle whatsoever to you know, use this thing for PvP usage, because they are just goated at that in my own words. But also just for PvE, obviously that taming is insane. The blood bag gathering also makes them really good for taming bloodstalkers, and I love that creature. I'll give it a brief honorable mention as an important Ark Tame, although it doesn't deserve to be on this list in my opinion, just because the other creatures here are a little bit more important than it. At number 3, we have got the Ark Tames, and this has been here just for so long nowadays. It's been here since day 1, I'm pretty confident, and on the island this is an absolute lifesaver. While the Pteranodon will probably be your first flyer, this is where the game is really going to change for you. You're going to notice a lot of progression difference when you get yourselves an RG. The weight and stamina difference between the Pteranodon and the RG is absolutely insane, especially considering their weight reduction on things like crystal, metal and obsidian. Don't know what crystal is. Guess I have to make a mod and make crystal now. Either way, these creatures are great for transporting all of those goods, and their saddle acts as a portable smithy too, especially if I'm doing caving, I find, and an Articulura gets my armor and just completely destroys it. I like to do 3 caves in one go instead of just going back to my base, because my base is usually in the north and quite a lot of the caves are located in central and southern regions. I like to do just a few in one go, and if I have some metal stored in my RG, obviously smelted, I can repair my flat gear before going to the next cave instead of having to go all the way back. Just a tip that I like to use a lot of the time. If you pair this thing with an Anki or a Dodic as well, you're going to get a lot of great gathering out of this creature, because you know those creatures can gather like there is no tomorrow, and with the weight reduction it is just great to have. They can also carry 2 creatures as well. They can carry a small one in your beak, so if you want to bring your dodo along with your adventures, then you can. And the regen buff which they have when you kill something and eat it, it is very welcome. In number 2, I'm putting the baryonyx, as caving is arguably one of the most important parts of the Ark game. Yes, those bosses are going to be an important part, but you can't even come close to doing any of them unless you've done the caves, because the artifacts are required, and this being just such a simple but yet so effective caving mount, it really does deserve to be on the list here for me. This creature can be found on the swamp biome, or just generally any river biome on ASA. On ASE, look in the swamp biome. On ASA, the spawns seem to be a little bit bugged, so you can kind of find them along any river, but if you can't find any, always go to the swamp, and that is going to be probably your safest bet. They have a very high amount of mobility too for a carnivore, and it does make sense considering their size. They can also jump a little bit as well if you want to go Mario style, I guess, and the spin attack on top of it makes it sort of Mario Galaxy style. It can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, and it's pretty decent for the underwater caves too, because it is a very nice swimmer. The reason why it's just so great for caving is the damage and health and mobility is simply so amazing for doing those caves, and on top of that it is the perfect size to fit into basically all of them. Don't try the artifact of the Skylord cave though, because that will never work in your favour, and that is why I find these creatures just to be so important. Now for me, this is my most important Ark Tame of all time, the Deinonychus. It is a great one for caving like the Baryonyx too, and it's even smaller and more mobile, and on top of that it deals the bleed ability, but it is insane for bosses too and general travel around the map, and it's the only Ark creature out there that can deal bleed damage to bosses. And sometimes when I'm with my pack of Deinonychuses, and actually most of the times, I'll skip out on using something like the UT, because the boss is only lasting about a minute and a half, 2 minutes anyway. It really does not make any difference, and maybe just lugging a UT around, it's not really what I want, and I want to be riding on one of the Deinonychuses to actually get it out and done as quick as possible. So the UT would essentially basically be doing nothing. Obviously I could set it to do it, but still I wouldn't really want that. It just kind of makes that scenario a little bit more messy, so that would be the only time that I wouldn't use it. The Deinonychuses aren't quite as good for the longer boss fights. Sometimes their health can pull them back a little bit, but if you do have some health mutations, you can actually go through even the alpha boss fights on Gen 1 on that Master Controller boss. I've done it before. Just, you know, you are going to need some pretty buffed up Deinonychuses for that. They also take no ball damage, which is just a nice addition for them to have, and scaling walls or vertical surfaces is an absolute ease, as they can simply jump across them and up them. It is going to be one of the easiest things that you encounter with this creature. It's general travel around the map. It is absolutely insane how good these things are as traveling mounts. and they're just so good at such a wide variety of things. I really do need to put them in at the number 1. The top 10 most fantastic Ark Tames. So in number 10, I want to put the Rhino Gnather, as I find this really does add a lot to the game that is Ark Survival Evolved, from the fact that it can pick up just such a wealth of creatures to its general travelling abilities. Also, considering it spawns on the island, it is accessible to pretty much everyone out there apart from mobile players, and I'm sorry, your version of Ark is a little bit depressing in my opinion from the creature side of things. But to console players out there, and just to PC players, of course, the Rhino Gnather is a creature which you'll find, you know, a lot of people are using these days. They are just so useful for general travel and traveling around with creatures too, and the fact that they can deal a heck of a lot of damage really does emphasize these creatures as being great ones, and they really are fantastic. They add a lot to the game, and they're very deserving of this spot on the list. Coming in next, we have got the Reaper, and this might just be nostalgia playing on me here, but I always think of this as a sort of a higher creature in regards to just such a fantastic creature than the Rhino Gnather. I find it blends into its map much more effectively, and it really did innovate for the time. Considering also the Rhino Gnather's taming method wouldn't have happened without the Reaper being there in the first place, as it pretty much just is a rehashing. This really does need to be here as well, as this has inspired further creatures along the way, and the Rhino Gnather simply hasn't. And I know it hasn't had a lot of time for just further creature development to come from it, as this is a 2017 creature after all, and that's a 2023 creature as far as I'm aware. I don't think it came out this year, I think it was last year, unless my brain deceives me. But yeah, I just feel like this has done a lot more for the Ark game, and I kind of prefer it as a creature. Its aesthetics are nicer. I like its abilities and its damage, although it doesn't really have too many abilities. The fact that it can go underground and can slow down creatures with its tail attack, deal a heck of a lot of damage, and just be really interesting to tame and interact with, makes it a fantastic creature for me. Next, I really want to put the Crystal Wyvern, as I find this is one of those creatures where I really find it is just so overpowered for the taming method. Taming a Crystal Wyvern is ridiculously easy, and way easier in my opinion than just a regular Wyvern. You need to be level 60, then simply knock out Crystal Wyvern and that primal crystal will be obtained. Then find a very specific spot on the back of it. It's kind of just between the head and the wings, sort of just on the body. There's a sort of spot where you can nestle there, and as it flies around, just click E whenever it wants that primal crystal, and you get yourself a Crystal Wyvern. I love the elemental abilities. My favourite one is the Blood Crystal Wyvern. The Emerald Crystal Wyvern is also quite a popular one among many. This is the Tropical Crystal Wyvern because I just think it looks better for the B-roll, but I find that elemental abilities are just more useful than the general Wyvern ones, and they also are just really lovely creatures to use and really easy to tame. In number 7, we have got the Shadow Mane, and this is just one of those creatures where it's like it is really innovated in the space, coming out in Gen 2, of course. It has been around for a fair few years now, 2 or 3. I think it's 3 now, considering I'm pretty sure Gen 2 is 2021. Hopefully I got that right. My brain can't really think back that many years at the moment because it's in a little bit of a fog in 2024 mode. But either way, this creature is just so packed full of abilities. It is insane. It can jump to incredible heights. It has the hydration buff. It has the pack buff. It can go invisible when there's the presence of both the male and the female, and they also do really work very well in the water. Again, that hydration buff is playing a huge part in that, but they are just great swimmers too, which can't be said about some other creatures which you'll find on the list. They really are versatile in terms of all things mobility. They are great damage dealing mounts and great for bosses, and great innovators in the small carnivore space. Coming up next, we have got the Argentavis, and it really does need to be here for me. The RG has been around ever since the beginning, and it's gone through obviously some TLC with a better model upgrade, and I think some new abilities added. Actually, I know some new abilities added, and it really does just carry in terms of a flyer. While not the fastest out there, it has 50% weight reduction on things like metal, crystal and obsidian, with the added bonus of its saddle acting as a portable smithy, which can't be said about quite a lot of other creatures just in the game. The Castaroides is a good example of another creature utilising this. They can also pick up a wealth of creatures like the Dodic and the Anki, which can help you to gather all things like those resources like I mentioned, metal, crystal, obsidian, but then you can get stone and flint and wood and thatch. Fiber you're not going to be getting on this thing, but really you can get a theory to do that, and that is going to be very effective. They can also carry a secondary creature in their beak too if you want to take your dodo for a little sky flight. And they are very, very effective in regening quickly too, as if you simply kill something and eat the dead body, or just simply eat a corpse of a creature, you're going to have a nice regen buff, which is going to carry you. In number 5, we have got the Baryonyx, and this is the best cavern creature really in my eyes, especially considering the time at which you're going to be getting this creature. Spawning in the swamp biome on the island, and swamp biomes on just other maps in general, and the whole bog biome on Gen 1 of course. These are really effective caving mounts. Their size is perfect, that they can pretty much slip into any sort of cave that you'd be wanting to go into. Their high damage and high health with great mobility allows them to go into these caves and fight against all of the combatants very effectively, and it really does great in this regard. They're great for underwater caving too, due to their spin attack, which in some creatures up to the size of a megalodon. They can also jump too, so I guess now you can go Super Mario Galaxy style. But yeah, they really are a favourite of mine. I love these creatures, and for the level you get in them at, and for the ease of taming, just a very basic knockouts, you really can't get anything too much better than one of these things. Coming up next, we have got the Desmodus, and the Sanguine Elixir that this thing offers is just such a valuable resource in my opinion. I simply had to put it on the most fantastic Ark creatures list. Also, with its nice neat glide ability, it is a very effective flyer. Obviously, the Sanguine Elixir is going to give you 30% of your tames like that with click of a button. There are also blood bag farms too, and for the next creature on the list, that is going to be a very huge help, or just a big helping hand in a way. They're great for PvP too, with the ability to pick players off mounts with relative ease, especially seeing that glide ability again. You can get quite a lot of speed going with these things. On top of that, they can grapple onto any kind of wall or vertical surface, or even ceilings like the Tapu Jara, which you'll find on Ark as well, although this is the fast period creature. The tame method is the same as the next creature on the list, I'll talk about it then. But yeah, really fantastic creature, spawns on Fjorda, and it is definitely innovated in the space. And in number 3, like you could probably guess, we've got the Bloodstalker. This is my all-time favourite, just general travelling mount really. The next creature on the list is, it just has got a slight edge, but for underwater travel this is really my go-to, and for general travel as well. I really do like it, although the other creature just slightly surpasses it. But for all of the other underwater travel, which I'm doing a surprising amount of at the moment, it's actually a little bit weird for me to be doing that, but it's definitely satisfying those needs. You tame it by getting blood bags, and you can feed it something like a moss chops first to get that effectiveness up to 100%, which, you know, to be honest, it's relatively easy to do if you just have the basic prep done. With Desmodus as well, you can farm those blood bags and get a Bloodstalker easily. The reason why they're so good at underwater travel is they're very fast and just generally mobile in a given underwater environment, and you can easily take them out of the water too, and you're essentially just like Spider-Man. They can glide along the top of the water too, and you can see the aggros of all the creatures in a low visibility environment like the ocean. That is really, really useful in my opinion. Let's get on to the next creature on the list then, shall we? Coming in at number 2, we have got the Maywing, and this really is the epitome of just general traveling mounts. You really can't get much better than this thing, especially in terms of the level you're getting this thing at. Its saddle was unlocked at level 18, but I usually get it in my mid-20s because some trank arrows are something which I use, because I just go for the highest level one I can find first, get a couple of signs, and then just trank it out. That's how, again, unlocked to level 18. You can craft it, it's ridiculously cheap, and then you've got a really high level one straight off the bat. You don't need to sort of stagger it in a way, just because of how easy they are to trap and actually tame. Then there's a little bit of learning curve in actually learning how to fly one of these things, but once you have done that, you really aren't going to struggle whatsoever at getting these things around the place, and they travel with such speed that there really is nothing better out there. They act as a portable feeding trough too, with that slight disturbing animation you'll see in a little bit. Still can't really get over it, but you know, I guess it's there. You can carry 4 babies as well in its saddle too, and even steal enemy baby creatures with this ability. They're pretty decent swimmers as well, not quite as good as the Bloodstalker, and they can actually skim along top of the water too. Again, like the Bloodstalker, but they're not quite as good as a swimmer. And they can gather berries too, actually. It's a nice, neat ability they have. And in number 1, we've got the Deinonychus, and I know this really does seem to very often top my lists, but I really do need to emphasize that I love this creature, and I think it's the most fantastic one out there with its very fast mobility, the fact that it takes no fall damage, and its wall climbing skills. It is great in the aspect of mobility. Not a great swimmer, but you know, for everything else this does all of the job that I need it to do, apart from flying, but you know, hey ho. They deal bleed damage to bosses, which only it does, and if you've got the pack buff on top of this as well, you can do some serious damage. And especially considering, again, you can do this to bosses, you can shred through them with absolute ease and have no worries or issues with them. It is just such a great creature for defeating bosses. I really can't emphasize enough how good it is for that job. And if you get some health mutations, you can do some of the longer ones as well. Again, when you're traveling, they take no fall damage, which is just such a nice, neat thing. It's small, but it really does add a lot of fluidity into your travel, as you don't have to worry about quickly dismounting before you hit the ground, because you realize you've jumped off something a bit too high and you don't really want to be taking any fall damage, because the reality is you're taking no fall damage when you're on one of these things. So if you haven't already, definitely consider one of these things. They're very easy to tame, in my opinion. Steal the eggs from the chalk cliffs biome and then raise it as your own, of course. Choose whichever level you really want to go for. At the start you can kind of go for a mid-range level or a high-range level, it doesn't really matter. Just get one and you're going to love these things, trust me. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciejewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.